guys, Bucktails. You want to talk about a classic muskie presentation? It has to be the #1 thing in everybody's tackle box. Everybody's throwing a bucktail, whether it be a spanky, whether it be a hooked on muskie baits, innovation, RJs, Bucktail. There are so many options available that are all fantastic. But what's neat about Bucktails, it's one of the easiest baits that we can build ourselves to custom make baits. Nothing's more rewarding than catching a monster muskie on something you made yourself. It's economical and you can get really purpose driven. So we're going to go back to the shop. We're going to dial in on how to build bucktails that are going to be super clean. They're going to work every time. They're going to be quality, and they're going to elevate your muskie fishing to the next level. Making a bucktail starts with the right components. Now, something that's not considered very often is the components that you choose are going to highly influence how a bucktail runs. Okay, something that people will look at that it's probably the most exciting element of your bucktail. It's going to be the skirting material. Okay, so we have Flashaboo material, and there's saltwater Flashaboo it's not even tied. You can make that yourself for extra time up. But we have a decision to make when we build a bucktail. We're going to build something out of Flashaboo, or we're going to build something out of hair. You know, is it going to be made with marabou? We have all these different options of these different skirt materials. So you need to make a decision on what's the purpose of this bucktail. Is this going to be something that emulates something you already have, right? Well, we can start there. Let's start with probably the most classic bucktail, which is going to be a single Indiana blade. It's going to be a recognizable pattern. We'll start there and then start discussing why these different parts and components, why are there so many? How we can utilize those to really take our fishing where we want it to go. So we'll start with something really basic. Let me just get a piece of wire here. These are just loose ones. So 051. Okay. You have a lot of different wires. So with these wires, they're going to vary. You have, 0500, you have 60, all these different degrees of thickness. So it's just a measurement, right? 0.060. This is the 0.062. The thickness of your bucktails. Now, if you've never built a bucktail or never had to repair one, a really good point of reference, if you own a spanky bait, that's your heavier bucktail wire, where say a MEPS might be your thinnest. So we'll start with just what's really in the middle. It's 051, right? That seems to be like the main bucktail wire across the board, right? So how can that influence what we end up with? All it is a piece of wire. Why would it matter? Weight, okay? So we have a durability question, and we have weight. So the thicker the wire, obviously, the heavier the blade's going to run. If my purpose is to say build a bucktail for fishing deep cover, fishing submerged humps in Canada, I need something that runs deep and fast. Going with the 062 or the heavier materials is going to help you achieve those goals. So we'll start with just the basics and we'll work through that. We have this basic piece of wire here. Boom. Okay, wonderful. We got a black skirt. Okay, nothing to it. All right, we'll sort of walk through this. We need to get our pieces. I will just go over here. We will put these back momentarily, but just grab them. A 7 on it. Is this a 6? Doesn't matter. Some really basic stuff here. So we've selected our wire, right? The 051. We're going to do a black skirt, and we need to select our blade. Now, there's a selection that's going to be made in the blade, which is also going to influence the running depth and the action of this bait. So coming over here, let's go with Indiana's. And so we have Indiana's, and we need fluted as well. There we go. So we got these fluted blades, right? These are number 7, or some people call them 700 size blades. These are your standard blades, right? So just a standard blade here. If you own them, you know what we're talking about. But there are some variations in blades that can change things as well. Not to overcomplicate it, but let's say that we're looking at the blades and they're offered in a different thickness. A thicker blade is going to do what? Influence your running depth. The thicker it is, the deeper it's going to run, or allow you to run at depth at higher speeds. So that is something to consider. Again, is the purpose of this bucktail to create something that's going to run shallow, mid, deep, right? That's going to be our question. So our blades can influence that heavily. So we're walking through the equation how to make these things and also making a simple one. I just want your run-of-the-mill 700 size blade. So we're just grabbing that standard blade there, okay? Nonetheless, you're contemplating the construction of this at all times. So your wire can change your running depth as well with the blade and your skirt material. So Flashabou, things of this nature. When we have the Flashabou, or we have the Marabou, or we have the hair, they all have different running depths, right? So quickly with that, something to consider is that your Flashabou, this is a man-made material, right? Hold it up here. You can see this is man-made. It is non-absorbent. It takes on no water weight and things of that nature. Hair doesn't either, but they have different properties where this, when it hits the water, it's sinking in. Hair has a little bit of more, for lack of a better term, a little more float in the water, if you will, a little higher riding. Marabou and things of that nature. So Marabou's even fluffier. So if we want just a standard bucktail, you know, it's really not going to make too much of a difference, but it's something to consider if you're going, hey, I need deep running or I need shallow running, that skirting material and our blade. So we have selected a skirt and we've selected a blade, and we know we want a standard piece of wire. Our next decision being Clevises and blades, or excuse me, Clevises and beads, right? So you have a bunch of different sizes here. There's tons. I'll try to show you a couple. There's number 8s, right, which is a relatively large Clevis. We have number 4s, which seem to be pretty commonplace here, and in a few different options, square Clevis, but it seems to be that, you know, a 4, 6, and 8 are kind of the ones here, and I'm going to pull one out each here so you have a matter of perspective. Why does this matter? And why would the size influence anything? So, as the Clevises increase in size numerically from a 4 to a 6 to an 8, which are kind of your industry standards, it's going to influence how things run. So I'll get these in the palm of my hand in order here. So that's 4, a 6, and an 8. Obviously, they are bigger, but what you need to consider in some capacity is that the bigger the Clevis, the blade of the bucktail will actually have to compensate into the Clevis before it starts rotating, right? So as this is sitting on a shaft, that blade's got to rotate this, and this thing is moving as one unit. So you don't want to do like a single blade slow rolling with a big wide Clevis. It's got to get started. It's got to take more, you know, force, more inertia in the water, if you will, to get this guy going. So don't try to make like something that's ultra light for really slow bucktail fishing that has too big of a Clevis. I'll tell you my rule of thumb, it never fails me, is just going right in the middle. The size 6 seems to be really standard, and so we're going to work with that. Now, when you get to the bigger Clevises, those big size 8s, those are going to be really good for your big boat blades. So bigger the blade you select, the bigger the Clevis you're going to need, okay? So simple thing to do. You can build little tiny stuff when we get down to the 4s. You know, something akin to some of the small MEPS presentations and these small little blades, if you're making your own kind of like Smitty or Smitty Wizard or Rizzo Wiz or something, a little diminutive bucktails. So small blades, small Clevises, big blades, big Clevises, okay? You can pull some tricks in there, but we've gone with standard. All right. Well, what else is going to influence how this thing runs? Obviously, the weight. We'll come over here. We have sinkers, right? Simple old egg sinkers available. 1/4 ounce, 3/8, 1/2 ounce, You know, 3/4. Now we're talking. And 1 ounces. I mean, they're all going to influence, obviously, the running depth of the bucktail. So, we do not want to try to have a shallow running bucktail with a heavy weight. That seems obvious. So, you want to kind of match, like I said, your game plan shallow, mid, and deep with a bucktail appropriately. You know, for a standard bucktail, it seems that a lot of bucktails come out anymore that they're 1/4 or 3/8. You know, 3/8 ounce seems to be about on brand. So we'll go with that. So that selection, you now have the main components of what would be kind of a standardized bucktail. 3/8 or 1/4, somewhere in that neighborhood. Number 6 clevis, your blade. And now we got to put these things together. So the only other components we need to consider that will influence the build of this are additional weight elements, right? So you have the weight of the sinker that we're using. We have the weight of the blade, or the thickness of the blade, and the wire selection, grabbing appropriate beads. Now, people are very, very into, right, their solid beads here, right? So these are solid brass beads. Some of them are chrome. Something to consider if we are building what our goal would to be, say, a lighter bucktail for early season. You can alleviate or reduce the overall weight of this by using plastic beads, right? You don't have to use brass beads. There's some plastic options available. So weight reduction. So for a shallower running bucktail, we're going to consider weight reduction. For deeper running bucktails, we need to consider, obviously, the additional weight. But for a standard, it seems like the standard across the board is, you know, we're going to go for brass beads or the chrome, right? The other thing is your lure body. Now, what I like to do, it's just my rule of thumb, is these bodies, which are what you see in the forepart of a bucktail, right? Little bodies, they sit below the blade. They're offered, you know, 3/16, 1/4 ounce, 3/8, 1/2 ounce. In a perfect world, as I'm building one of these things, I'm going to try to balance this as best as I can, right? So if I have a 3/8 egg sinker in the back, I want a 3/8 sinker in the front. I like a little bit of balance because this brass body is his secondary piece of weight, right? It's not there for decoration. And I feel that on a standard build for me, having them balanced, you know, let's just do this for argument's sake or educational sake, right? Dependent on the build. So at a core of a bucktail, this is the weight that's hiding in here, which we'll get to in a second. But, you know, I'm trying to balance this guy. I want it to run nice and flat. That's really going to help with your blade starting. Okay, you see these guys, or you see these blades, they can't get a bucktail started. Well, when they're hitting the water and you're in the tail sinking, or it's not flat in the water, now you're trying to force this clevis to open at an awkward angle. I want that flat as best as I can, right? So for a shallow application, and say you're just going to use plastic beads, which add very little overall weight, right? Because these are the heaviest components of this build. You know, the hook is involved in that element. So, you know, you can kind of argue that a single hook in the blade might counteract. This is not exact science on that anything, but we're counterbalancing this thing to run flush and flat to our best of our ability, right? So on a standard build, I'll come in, if I'm doing a 1/2 ounce, let's do a 1/2 ounce lure body, right? It's a loose rule of thumb that's always served me well. So we'll give 3/8 and 3/8 here. But think about a little bit of balance in that. Just a little bit of balance in that build. The only other component that we're going to consider here is beads. Like I said, we talked about those. Something that I'm going to tell you. Muskies do not care about 99% of the decorative element of a bucktail, right? To me, once we're outside the core components, which is the weights, the hook, the blade, and this, everything else is superfluous. It's not important. So what I'll do is I'm trying to make a really balanced bucktail right now. So I'm going to grab small beads. Okay. These are, I believe that's the right shaft size. Okay. These are just small beads. We're going to build off this. All right, make sure I got enough here. I think I should be in the ball game. And I'll show you a couple tricks here. So I'm just grabbed a little tin bag of beads. You'll see when guys, when you buy a bucktail from a company, they're doing a very nice pyramid, a progression of beads that are going to grow from, you know, the largest beads at the bottom, and they're going to go up to the top near the clevis, and it's usually like a pyramid stack. You know, it's more of a decorative experience in that regard. So that doesn't matter to me too much in this build. I'm trying to make this guy kind of balanced here, so let's just kind of roll with that. So we have our piece of wire here. Let's say you got pre-bent or not, whatever. I like to make things kind of rough and ready. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to snip this. And we'll just start with an unbuilt thing. And this is kind of like a bush build, and we'll get it rolling here in a second. Let's build this classic style bucktail. So there's a couple tools I have on hand here that are going to be important to doing this. You can, there's great bucktail making kits. The Musky Shop has numerous kits, and there's tools and all this stuff. I'm going to use hand tools. That's what I'm accustomed to. That's what I prefer using, because a lot of times I'm making these on the boat while we're out guiding. I'm making them quickly, and muskies don't really care, right? Cut to the muskie on the wall that goes, I don't care. They're not worried about it being perfect. We just need to focus on function. What is handy though, and I do have that right now, is an AFW round bender, right? It's very convenient for bending round wires. Now, with that being said, I've used vice grips plenty of times. It doesn't matter. You can take a pair of vice grips. But we'll start with working on bending this around. Crimp it in your hand. Use a little bit of force here. Bam. Right. I've got a nice round wire bend. So what I'm going to do is put it in the vice grips here. All right. Those are good and firm. Bend it around. I like to get, you know, 1 or 2 nice revolutions on that. It doesn't have to be crazy, okay? We don't have to go full tilt. A muskie is not going to pull that out. They're not that powerful. Take a nice little piece of cutters here. I'm going to cut that flesh as best as I can. So something I like to look at is to make sure I don't have any sharp edge here that your line or leader could ever get on. I'll take my file, clean that up if need be, right? I can put that in the vice grip even. There. Just make sure where I cut is just nice and flat and smooth, right? Just takes a second. I've done this a million times in the boat with a hook file. Just make sure everything's looking good there. Okay, so I've got my loop in, and that is going to be the way I like to build these things. Is that's going to be our line attachment. A lot of times you'll see guys, you get a pre-loop and they build from the bottom up. Right, I'll show you the way I build one, the way I prefer to do it. So we need to think about the construction and how we're going to do this and keep it functioning, right? So the kiss of death on a bucktail is the spacing between the components being appropriate, right? So I'm going to lay this out. You've got your weight here that's going to be under the skirt, your weight that's in front of it, your blade, and your clevis. Everything else is spacing material aside from the hook. It's all spacing. It has nothing to do with the function of the bait. So I want to make this a shorter profile overall. Let's say you've got a bucktail that you like and you want to clone it. You know, you can pay attention to the overall build of the bait. I'm not worried about the overall wire size, the lengthwise. You know, muskie is not going to know the difference that this is 1.5 inches longer than the one that you bought at the store. They don't care, right? Let's just go. They don't care. So we're going to try to approximate this the best that I can. This is the way I prefer to build them. Instead of going from the hook up, I go from the top down. So, first and foremost, your clevis. Simple deal. The clevis is fed onto the wire on one side. All right, boom. Blade on the other side, and it's on there. All right. The only thing you can mess up here is leaving one side off or not putting the blade on. Okay, pretty simple. Next thing we need to do is consider this. So when we're building, we don't want to have this all at the top and shove all our components here. We need to create a little bit of space here, right? So if you've never done this before and you're not accustomed to it, maybe it's the time you take a little piece of tape here or something and just buffer it right there so you can't build up to it, okay? So we now have our blade on, got a little bit of space here. We need to strategically put this guy together for the best functionality. So we have this lure body, and we've got the skirt. Kiss of death on this is getting the blade too close to the skirt, right? Or that the lure body is too tight up here. So this is where spacing becomes a thing. We don't want this stacked on top of each other right on top. What we need to do is space this out appropriately with some beads. Okay, so with this, what I'm going to do is just thread them on here. And what I like to do in my kind of build, it's the way I like to build it, is if I'm doing the beads, maybe about close to halfway down the blade worth of beads, maybe, just depends. Then I'll do my lure body. All right. Now that has created enough space where the lure body is right to the end of that blade. Okay. If I wanted to, I could get away with one more bead above it. I'm going to put one more below it. What that's doing is that's creating the spacing I need above the skirt. Now, why does that matter? Let's just put the skirt on here and say we don't do enough blades. Well, guess what? The blade's in the skirt. It's not going to start. When you hits the water, we have an obstruction here, obviously, right? Can't even, it's going to be problematic. So 4 beads is what the ticket is on this guy. Lure body on there. And again, I'm looking for that nice spacing there. It's just about to the end of that blade, if not. And then before I put my skirt on, a couple more beads. All right. A couple more beads go on this guy. And then I'm going to feed my skirt. Okay. Doesn't matter which side here. And then we'll give it a look here. So, do I now have spacing? So when this guy hits the water and everything's pulled back, I am free of the obstructions of that skirt, right? So in the water, all this material is laying back and it's under force. That blade is going to have no problems getting started each and every time I hit the water. Okay? So that is what I'm looking at. These beads are spacing. The next thing we need to consider now is we have a hook. So in the water, as this guy's laying here, this skirt's flattened out, but this is determinate. This is as long as that skirt's going to be. So we need to start thinking about where we want our hook placement. At times, do we want the hook in the skirt or on the back side of the skirt? I always err for the hook. The back bends are setting about even with the back of the skirt. That's how I prefer it. You can get away with it further back if you got nip and fish, this is why I like building my own bucktails. If you got nip and fish or fish that are acting funny, you can quickly adjust this. So I now need to take into consideration the spacing of the skirt. So I now have a little bit of distance to cover. Okay? This again comes into beads. Now, with that being said, depending on what you want to build, you can build this thing however that you want with any material. Muskies do not care. You can use plastic beads here. You can use a freaking straw from a cup of coffee. I don't care. All we're doing is creating distance right here so that we have appropriate spacing. All right, so I'm stacking the beads here. Stack them up. Stacking more beads. All right. You can get away with anything. Little plastic spacers is something I prefer. If I'm looking for weight reduction, definitely plastic spacers, right? So I got some beads under there. Next, I'm gonna feed my weight. Okay, now I'm going. Okay, I've got this in my hand. I'm gonna kind of pull the skirt to the side here and look at this guy and go, if I do my hook bend, where am I gonna be at? So I'm a little longer than I want to be, so I can start pulling some beads off that look like a couple, maybe even arguably 3. Come back. As you can see, I'm still just playing with the wire here. So if I bend that, and about the overall length of the hook, right? If you can see that, I'll remove that skirting material back for you. I'm kind of going for this visual here, right? Versus the length of the skirt, which ought to be about right. So I'm going to slide this guy back up. Now my next job is putting a bend right there. Right? So I know if I'm about in that neighborhood, and I got clearance up here, like I said, this is the time we do not want to get that bunched up, right? So we've taped it, we got some clearance right there. I know at this thing, if I get close to this, wait, I do a nice bend, boom, once over. Grab my vice grips. Alright, come on now. And bend it over once, right? Now, what I'm going to do right now, before I cut that, I'm going to check my spacing, okay? Make sure everything's good here. And everything's nice and appropriately spaced. If I need to, I can take a moment right now. I could add more winds to this and space things up, right? So you could use more material if you need to move the material up or down. You can actually wrap that wire. But everything looks good there. I'll give her one little wrap around here. That's nice and secure, so I have a complete rotation. Come in here. Gonna give that guy a snip. Safety squints there, protect your eyes. I still like to come in here and just like dress that out with a file. You can use your hook file or maybe a more aggressive file. Make sure there's no rough edge there for a second. All right. The next component is we got a split ring here. Bam, split ring. You can put it on the hook first or you can put it on the bait. Really doesn't matter. I usually just do them both at the same time so I don't have to open that sucker up twice. And bam, we have a classic style 700 blade bucktail, built, done, easy cheesy, right? That's the sum of the parts, okay? We took our time and did that. You could do that in a matter of minutes. It can be a really fast thing, okay? So that's just the thought process. You'll see people heat shrink these guys, right? They'll do a heat shrink job here, and you can do that. Or if you're like me, you can even use electrical tape in a pinch, or if you want to repair it, and that'll straighten it out. So that's the basics of that. Let me just go ahead. And this is how non-precious these things are, right? Bucktail, who cares? Boom. Let's talk about the only thing we need to consider if we're doing a double. All right, guys, that was, the recipe, the basics of how to really make that classic single-bladed bucktail. Now, like I said, however you decide to do it, whatever tools you have on hand, the main consideration is spacing. But let's look real quick at another popular option, which is double blade, right? The same concepts are going to apply. The main difference is we're using 2 blades, and now we're using 2 clevises. So it's relatively simple. However, I'll show you. The trick is we're going to thread the first clevis on, followed by the first blade. All right? The way to interweave these appropriately is the second clevis goes on next, followed by the back end of the first clevis. Then we're going to introduce the second blade. Right, and that's it. That's the only difference. So we're going to put our eyes on that, make sure everything's appropriate. The blades are facing the right way, and we're good to go, right? So we got a loop at the top of this guy. Now, the same things are going to apply, and I'll do this one a lot faster here. We need to look at our blade spacing yet again. So we have our lure body and our beads. So I'm threading some beads here. Give it a look. And then grab our lure body. And I think 3 or 4 should get us where we want to be. I think that's the minimum there, especially if we want to build, say, like a light build. Couple more beads added to this guy. Let me get one that will go on easy here. Couple more beads. Grab a skirt. All right. And we're spaced appropriately here. We have good clearance above the skirt material. So both those blades are going to open up super easy, and it's going to work great. Yet again, we're threading more beads on here, looking at our overall build. Our spacing of the entire thing here, right? Let's look here. I've got some beads. I've got the hook. We're going to also come back here, grab us a fresh big treble hook here. Okay, skirt material. By the time I do a bend in that, looks about right. Come up here. Looking at everything, do a little slide down. We should be about correct. Wham. Grab my vice grip. Quick twist. Handy dandy cutters. Snip him off. Nothing sharp there. Alright, cool. Now I have that appropriately spaced. The last component we're going to need there is we're going to put our hook on. Grab a fresh split ring here out of just the random pile. These will work. Split ring. Mr. Hook. Get him on there. A good split ring when they're tight, it's a good way to get poked. And get him on there easy. Come on now. Gonna be pesky. Alright, always the thing. I love one thing I do all the time is I go the wrong way. That's exciting when you do that. Get this guy opened up here. There you have it. You can put heat shrink on the back of that guy if you want. Again, we have a double blade bucktail, kind of in the vein of your typical classic cowgirls, things of that nature. You've got this simple build here. That's all it takes to build a bucktail. The main considerations are weighting, somewhat in the balancing, and making sure you have the clearance of the blades. Once you have the clearance of the blades, you're building these things, you can make anything you want. The only other thing I'll mention here is you can get a second hook on if you want one by the addition of a split ring, which you can add on after the fact. You could put that above this bead here and then stagger a couple split rings here. That's all it is. That's a simple deal there. Like I said, we have so many parts and pieces. If you look around here, it's basically a musky guide or a musky angler's dreamscape back here. Black blades, green blades. You want to do a big flowage green and a black willow combo, or anything you can dream up is right here, right? So once you get those basics down, you can build anything you want, any weighting you want. It's very handy. Say you're fishing big Canadian water, you want a heavy bucktail, do that. There's not that mystique behind these things. You're capable of doing it with a couple tools at home. Build the bucktail your dream, save a couple dollars, and you have exactly what you want in your tackle box, and that's going to put a big muskie in your net.